Hi, Race Design. So welcome to our non-destructive editing and Photoshop Mass workshop. Today I'll be giving a brief introduction over the basics of non-destructive editing and one of the important components of it, which is utilizing Photoshop Mass to its largest extent. So just a brief introduction. If you've ever been using Photoshop and you do a lot of actions and you realize that a while back you made this small mistake and you Control Z and realize that the Photoshop memory for Control Z ran out and there's just no way for you to go and fix that mistake unless you do something really messy like trying to brush over it or clone tool the mistake away. And so non-destructive editing is just sort of a working methodology that focuses on making changes without ever needing to go back and edit something because the original data will always be available of that image. So you'll always be able to backtrack any of your adjustments because most of your adjustments will be in separate layers. That way, the resolution of your image and the image will stay intact, and it's overall just a more flexible work style. Overall, non-destructive editing is not just like one single technique, but it's a series of different workflows and styles of working that essentially are focused on utilizing the layers options in Photoshop in order to always retain the originality of your source photos. So some of the benefits of working non-destructively are that it's really easy to fix your mistakes. You can go back and edit any of your past actions, and you can restore any of the portions that have been deleted or edited to not show. So let's begin with some of the basic methods of non-destructive editing. So a really good way to always start is to take your background image and copy it. So here you can just duplicate the layer, keep one hidden and locked just so you never change it. And if you're not making any direct edits to that layer anyways, it's always good to lock it just so you don't accidentally draw or change the image in any way. So that's just really good. First basic step. In terms of keeping with the non-destructive editing methodology. Now, the second would be to use adjustment layers. So adjustment layers, if you go over here to the bottom tab, or if you go into Windows and go into adjustments, it'll actually bring up this little tab right here. So the adjustments layers basically creates sort of a separate layer that gives you filtering options to edit your work. And so an example of this is, let's say I want brightness or contrast. So here with this separate layer, I can actually do some basic photo editing. And this is nice because I'm not literally changing the photo in any way. This is a separate layer. I can turn it off, I can turn it on, I can make it a clipping mask so that it only applies to one layer, or I can put it at the top and make it apply to the entire document. So adjustment layers are just a really great way to make any of these small brightness, color, hue, curve, any of those sorts of things, adjustments to your overall work while keeping it in a layer that's very easily handled and managed. So there's that one. Another really good beginning methodology for non-destructive editing is if you're ever retouching the photo, do so on a separate layer. So for example, for something like the clone stamp, right? Most of the times when you're using the clone stamp, you will have sample right here on current layer. And so because of that, anything that I click will be from this layer and you will be working on this layer. However, let's say I don't actually like this part that I just did with the clone stamp, because I'm working on the direct image, if I do this too many times and Control Z runs out, I will have no way to edit this or get rid of it. I'll be stuck with this. And so in that case, of course, that's why we have that backup background image saved right here. But if we didn't have that, a really good way of working non-destructively is to create a new layer. And when you do want to use the clone stamp, right up here at sample, change it to either current and below or all layers. This will allow you to use the clone stamp in a layer of its own while taking the information from other layers to create that cloning effect. And so now you can see that I'm literally doing what I had been doing earlier on that current layer, but now it is in a separate layer of itself. And if I decide that I don't like it, it's really easy to hide, delete, or go in and just erase portions that I want. And so this can be used with a lot of different tools: clone stamp, healing brush, spot healing brush, content aware patch, or any of these types of tools. Just always make sure to come up here to sample and just check what setting you currently have it on, whether that is all layers or just current layers. And so moving on, another just quick tip is when you are cropping your image, usually I believe that Photoshop's default is to have this command on, which is delete cropped pixels. And so that will mean if I were to crop my image to here, all of that has just been deleted. So look at that. The photo that was originally very large is now just literally what I had cropped it to. So let's go back for a second. So let's say I want to crop, and you notice how my original photo that I'm using for this background is very, very large. The great thing about not having delete cropped pixels selected is that I can crop my canvas or my image to whatever size that I want, and it'll change the canvas size and cropping, but that image is still going to be there. So if I want to make any small adjustments, move it around, I realize, oh, I actually like this side of the skyline better, that image is still retained there and unchanged. So it's always good to just make sure you and be aware that that setting is checked or unchecked. Let's see. Next, it's going to be, just one more quick thing is if you cropped something, for example, and you want to see everything, for example, the boundary box of my artboard right now is this rectangle. And so because of that, you know that my image is actually this big, but it is hidden right by my artboard boundaries. If you ever want to just see the entire thing, there's a shortcut here. If you go to image and reveal all, that will just show literally everything that is on your board. So just a really quick tip on that. Next, moving on, another really key component of non-destructive editing is the concept of masking. So masking, using either layer or vector masks, allow you to sort of create a filter or cut things on a separate layer. And because it is on a separate layer, it's non-destructive because you can always edit that layer without ever touching your original image. So what exactly is a mask? A mask is a tool used to hide or partially hide portions of your image in a non-destructive manner, as just explained. So Photoshop has a lot of different masking options, from pixel mask to vector mask to quick mask to clipping masks, and a lot of others, all of which kind of define pixel opacities without affecting the original data. And so in this workshop today, I'll be going over the two most popular methods of masking, which are layer masks and clipping masks. So when you first start Photoshop and you get into it, you'll probably wonder about what is the difference between a layer mask and a clipping mask. So a layer mask kind of provides more control over a single layer's pixels. So the way I kind of imagine it is I tend to use layer masks almost as exclusively cropping or fading or erasing an image, choosing only what parts to show. Whereas clipping masks hide areas of a layer kind of based on pre-made selections or paths. So for example, if I had this rectangle right here, let me quickly demonstrate. If I have a rectangle right here and I want to make a clipping mask onto that with this water texture, you'll notice that this image has just been basically cropped to this layer underneath. And another aspect is that all of the properties of that layer will be followed by your clipping mask. So opacity, any lighting settings like that will all be followed. And so kind of the difference of the clipping and the layer mask is very subtle, but for layer, I usually use it to literally choose what parts of the image to show, whereas clipping mask, I find I tend to use more as like filtering effects onto specific objects that I've already created and using the boundaries of that object that are already predetermined with my clipping mask, whereas layer masks are kind of more of actually creating those predetermined boundaries. I guess once I actually start showing some more examples, you'll know more. It'll be easier to understand. So back to layer masks. Layer masks use black and white to show or hide parts of a layer. Whereas clipping masks kind of use the actual content and transparency of one layer to control the visibility of another, as you just saw with that wave example. So let's go ahead and jump right into using a layer mask. So let's see. I have this beautiful picture of LeBron giving a valedictorian speech in his alumni old graduate costumes. So let's say I only want LeBron. I do not want his background. So this button right here is going to be your create a layer mask button. So I'll click that. And now I'm on a layer mask. So the important thing, if you do need to remember anything about a layer mask, is that white shows, black hides. So on this layer mask, I'm going to have, notice that I'm currently on black. Black is to hide. So you notice that as I'm drawing with my black here, it's basically erasing that part of the image. And so this is the idea of non-destructive editing. Normally, you could take this image of LeBron and literally crop it and delete his background. But with non-destructive editing, I am doing the same thing, but if I just turn off this layer mask, my original image will be completely untouched. So this is just the beginnings. I'm currently using black to kind of crop or delete the pixels that I do not want. Let me show you that white is the opposite, is show. So that's just the basics of the clipping mask, the layer masks. And let me just finish doing this. Now, let's say that for this project, I want this almost glowing figure of LeBron in the sky, overlooking the skyline of Houston. And this bottom portion looks kind of whack. I don't want this abrupt line. So if you'll notice, I'm actually on a soft, round brush. And because of the fact that the black in those portions are not completely 100%, that's how you're getting this sort of neat fading effect. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at that. Very ethereal LeBron James, or whatever his name is. Wow, look at him. Looks very cool. I would definitely let him speak at my graduation. Anyways, so I have this, you'll notice that my clipping mask, right, is in this little thumbnail over here. If I want to show that clipping mask, if I hold Alt and I click on the thumbnail, you'll notice that this is actually my clipping mask layer. And so sometimes it's like nice just to like see, so I can be like, oh shoot, I like missed a few lines, blah, blah, blah. And of course, to revert back to the other layer, Alt click again. And so there is our layer. Another alternative way to have done that, let's have this owl right here. Let's do another clipping mask. Another quicker way, you notice how for Libron, when I was doing my layer masking of what to show and what to hide, I was using a brush and literally drawing with black and coloring in the areas I wanted to hide. Shortcuts you can always do, for example, let me make my owl a little smaller. Shortcuts you can do are using selection tools to really quickly select the backgrounds of an image. So let's just delete all of the black of our owl picture right here using my quick selection tool. And of course, it's just a rough project. No need to be amazing. Sorry. Now I am on my clipping mask. I will use bucket and I will color that area black, and boom, much faster way of doing that clipping mask. So similarly, let's go in and do the bottom half of this picture. All right, and now once again, fill, and there you go. You can see the beauty of the clipping mask, just very quickly cutting out all those parts. So let me just get some of these areas that I missed, and I'll just go in with the brush for those. And so wow, look, we have an owl. So those are just some very different ways that you can do the clipping mask, layer mask, quickly color them in. Let's see. Oh, quick trick. If you're ever working in a layer mask and you want to check your work to see if you've ever missed any small details, one thing you can do is go into layer, layer style, and stroke. And probably choose a really bright color for the purpose of doing something like this. Is you'll notice that now everything on that layer has been outlined. And so this just lets me go in, and if I miss any weird spots, I can check on them. Of course, you can turn that off once you don't want it anymore. Just a good way to double check your work. Let's see, let's go back to our Libron. So this is the one I just had for you. I, of course, have made a few others already. A lovely sitting Libron and a book Libron. And so let's say I'm actually doing a project to make a poster of Libron overlooking the city of Houston in a very grand way. Doesn't he look great? Wow. Let's put him, I don't know, let's put him here in the skyline. Look at that, amazing. And let's say that we want to move into clipping masks now. So that's just a brief overview of layer masks. I have attached a bit of a worksheet to kind of follow along with and go back and refer to if you ever forget anything. So feel free to look at that. But we'll be moving on to clipping masks now. So the concept of a clipping mask, right, is that you have two layers, one that will be the clipping mask and one layer that is essentially determining the boundaries of the clipping mask. And so we have our Librons here. Let's turn them off very briefly. Let's say I wanted to use clipping masks to create this really cool effect onto the sky. So right here, I have the sky filled in a boundary. So what I did earlier was I took my polyline and just very quickly followed the brief skyline edges and then colored that in. So I have this layer and I have this cool water texture layer. So let's say I want this water texture layer to be cropped into that boundary of the sky. I'm going to take my water texture, right click, and that's how you create a clipping mask. And boom, that entire image is now cropped within the boundaries of the layer below, which is that orange layer marked sky. And as you can see, the way this works is the picture I'm using is pretty big, but no matter where I drag it, it will always be within that area of the sky. So let's say I want this part of the picture to be in here. And now what's really cool about this is that this layer below is actually informing the layer above. So if I change the opacity of that layer, it will also affect my clipping mask opacity. And something really cool, if you're just getting started and wanting to check out stuff, once you do a clipping mask, go into this option here and really just explore all of these effects essentially. They can look really cool and you might get an unknown effect that you actually really like. Like, whoa, that's very graphic, or ooh, that gives that nice like warmer gradient than the sky that was there before, right? So I can add it, mess with the opacity. Let's say I'm satisfied with that. It gives more of a nice sunset-y vibe. So with the clipping mask, I usually use it as textures. For example, let's say instead of that water, I want this cool watercolor texture. Let me release that. So if you don't want that layer to be a clipping mask anymore, you can go in and click release clipping mask and that'll stop it. So let's say I want this watercolor texture as my clipping mask now. You'll notice that that texture right there is now sort of a part of that mask. And so most people who do use clipping masks tend to use them in a way that is more subtle. It just adds texture to certain parts of your photo and certain layers. And so I'd say that's really the strength of it. You can layer as many of them as you want. And they're very flexible to use and they never actually change that original picture. So I have my new cool watery textured sky, got my Librons right here, cropped using my clipping mask, this owl, let me move him around. That looks cool. All right, and then I have this rice logo. Let's just move that here. And yeah, using layer masks and clipping masks, I made a very kind of really crappy, but a very quick, I guess, poster. So using these strategies, you can always make really quick versions of these, maybe without the owl. But yeah, that literally took like 10 minutes. You have this weird fading fatherly figure in the sky above this cool looking poster of Houston. And those seem to be the basics. And of course, non-destructive editing wise, all of my pictures are still here. I can go into all of these. I can still have the original versions of each one. Turn this off. Turn this off. Hold. Oh yeah, to release or turn off a layer mask, just shift click on it. And so let me do that one more time. Boom. Every single image that I just showed you is still in its entirety original state. And so that's really the strength of the clipping masks and layer masks, is that they are all still right here, not having affected the original image quality or anything like that. Yeah, so that's a very brief introduction to starting a non-destructive editing work style, along with the basics of clipping and layer masks in Photoshop. Of course, my name is Christina Zoe. I am your graphics and illustration lead in Rise Design. Feel free to message me anytime in Discord if you have any questions. And I hope you enjoyed this really quick and dirty jump into non-destructive editing.